I have a few housekeeping things I'm going to quickly run through. There was a code of conduct that was sent out before this webinar. Please be kind and please respect everyone. If there is any violations of the code of conduct, you will be removed from the webinar. For any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat and we will make sure that Alex is aware of them and addresses them. And Alex also has a survey that he would like you to complete. I have myself and the organizers have placed it in the chat, so feel free to fill that out. And in today's session, we will explore what Wikidata means for users in the library, ecosystem, and institutions in Toronto. I am, at this point, going to stop talking and turn it over to Alex, who's going to share his knowledge about Wikidata in Toronto.
Thanks for the intro, Rachel. Hi, my name's Alex. As Rachel said, I am currently working as Open Technology Specialist at University of Toronto Libraries. Going in, a couple of heads up. So on the top right is the short link for getting to this slide. All of the content is there in case you want to like catch up later, in case you want to like go in and view other links. In terms of how I've set up the presentation, I just wanted to get some sense of how comfortable you were in terms of like some concepts that play into Wikidata. So if you could take the moment to fill out the check-in form. If you can't see the link to the check-in form, then I'm just gonna re-paste it into chat in case you just came in. If you could just fill that out, then I'm gonna take a quick look, see where we're at, and then proceed with that knowledge. As you can see, like this is the Wikidata icon. It kind of has like Wikipedia overlaid over it. And that's partly because Wikidata is like in and of itself, like it's a really interesting ecosystem, but it becomes even more interesting when we consider it in light of other ecosystems that do play into it. So that's sort of like some heads up for going into this presentation that like, yes, the focus of our discussion is today absolutely on Wikidata, what that sort of means in the Toronto context and Toronto's like library and archives institutions. That said, it'll touch on adjacent platforms, including say Wikimedia Commons, Wikipedia, that do basically enrich the information seeker's journey effectively in finding whatever they need and how they go about doing that. I'm just going to take a second now to pivot to the check-in form super quickly. Let's see how we're doing here. Responses. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. From what I'm seeing right now, I will generally clarify. Yeah, if you know a concept already, then please be patient with me. I want to make sure that the presentation just makes sense generally to everybody. And yeah, I guess we'll go from there. Feel free to keep filling out the survey if you'd like, but based on what we have so far, I'm going to proceed with knowledge that we are going to clarify basic concepts, and we obviously have like a fairly diverse representation in terms of people's departments and functions. All right, wonderful. So once again, the slide link is on the top right. Oh, and thanks, Caitlin. So I thought that I would start off by zooming out a little bit and thinking about what Wikidata means or like how it gets used in the context of how people are already looking for information. So I kind of split this up into like sort of digital demand, like where users go to like find what they need already. And in terms of like digital supply, it's like in terms of how we are arranging information for people to find, how we're indexing it, et cetera. So Web 2.0 might be a term that you're familiar with. It very broadly denotes the sort of like the moment that we tend to be in, like sort of in the everyday when we're just like Google searching information, we're just using the internet, we're using blogs. There's a lot of like social networking. It's a very human-centered use of the web. And a lot of the way that this works, obviously, is in terms of like hyperlinking and text matching. So this would be a lot of like keyword searches. When we just say, oh yeah, Google something, this would be a lot of like sort of our Web 2.0 sort of way of looking for information. This is obviously not something that's likely to just like immediately go away. It's not like we're going to transition from Web 2.0 to like the next thing, and then suddenly all of the ways that we do things are going to change. So this is obviously something that I wanted to highlight as a constant. And the way in which that I wanted to highlight this was that this is the context in which Wikipedia, for example, comes to prominence. And I'm just going to get to that point in a second, but that's Web 2.0. There's also Web 3.0, which has obviously been around conceptually for a while. It's been building. They also call it the semantic web. If you've heard about discussions regarding linked open data before, then this is how that discussion sort of comes into play here. The idea behind this is that because Web 2.0 like relies a lot on sort of text matching, it's very human friendly, but it's not very easy for machines to read that knowledge or like index it for humans to use ultimately. So the idea behind the semantic web is that if there are many things, and the limitation of Web 2.0 is that we can only recognize them to be relevant to us when we look for the exact keywords, then the idea is that that's not necessarily good enough because we're not necessarily comprehensively finding what we need to get from the internet. So in order to prioritize the machine's ability to index for you what you need, we get something called the semantic web, which is if every sort of institution or like everybody sort of like has like, so let's so that we keep an inventory of things. So that each of those things we need to keep like metadata for, right? So they don't immediately make sense to the machine. We have to tell the machine like, oh, this is how this gets used, like this is how it's relevant. And that arrangement or constellation of like the items in like an inventory that we might have gets tied together in a system of what we call triples. So the semantic web is basically a system of these triple relationships. Just to zoom in on that point super quickly, we're going to zoom into the Wikidata interface shortly, but this is the abstracted version of what that means. So honestly, like even without looking at this, the concept of it is fairly similar to even like pivot tables where you have like the X, right? And then like that's like one way in which like some part of information is relevant, and then another part of the information is relevant, and then where the two intersect, you'll have the value. So really the idea here is there's the item, so there might be somebody called Douglas Adams, and then this being the item, there's the property. So for example, he might have been educated at, say, St. John's College. And then that the property is the educated at part, because like that's the linkage for what links Douglas Adams to St. John's College. And then St. John's College is the value of where he was educated. So it's these sorts of three-part relationships that make the semantic web work. And that becomes then the context for, again, kind of coming back here, the system of triple relationships. So once we have all of these things arranged in terms of triples, as we will zoom into later on, we start being able to do much more sophisticated things. Like, for example, if in the Web 2.0 context, somebody could only really like search for, okay, so who won the Nobel Prize in whatever year? We can also start building in many layers of information for search, like, so who won in this year the Academy Awards, but who also won like the Nobel, I don't know, like, so, and somehow in their lifetime, they won both Nobel Prize and the Academy Award. Will we necessarily get that information from Google search? We don't know, maybe somebody's written about it. But if that relationship is specified somewhere already within the massive linked and open web of these informations that are related to each other, then we can query that information and the computer will give it back to us without us needing to rely on somebody already having had to write about that. I am just going to do a quick check-in. Am I making sense so far? How's this looking? I'm happy for you to drop something in chat if something that doesn't quite make sense. Cool. Seeing none, I'm gonna take that as we're good to go. So we're about to zoom in now to Wikidata, Wikipedia part, which now function as like very low barrier platforms for entering the way that people use information already. So as you can see here on the right side, this is the digital supply, how we store and index our collections. The point here to kind of get is that if the left side, the digital demand is already where users are going and have been going for a very long time, and increasingly as people gain more ability to like formulate queries and ask more sophisticated questions, they're just moving around here. We are, the way, the workflows that we use currently to index information, it largely operates separately from this entire ecosystem. And so what a lot of institutions have been increasingly doing is they've been trying to use low barrier platforms to move closer to where users actually are looking for information. And that's the context, again, in which Wikipedia and Wikidata come in. Wikipedia being sort of the front end where people interface with it most extensively, just because it's narrative. It's like, it's easy to read that, like, and when you read a page, it makes sense to you immediately without needing to say convert code to human language. Wikidata is ideally, this is the thing that, again, it allows you to formulate more sophisticated queries, but ultimately it's most useful when it can then bring you out of that semantic web into the links that you will find very, very useful. Like, for example, like the narrative links, like the websites, like the archival sources that, for example, libraries and archives would hold. So zooming in now to those two low barrier platforms for accomplishing this. You'll immediately see that Wikimedia Commons has been added into this mix. I'm going to get there in just a second. So going from the top, Wikipedia, again, it gets by far the most use. This is the front end contact point for the everyday person. Wikidata is sort of the mother hub then of like open metadata. So in addition to each institution keeping their own metadata, if hypothetically we were able to link and open up all of those data, then we would eliminate a lot of redundant labor, because not everybody would need to be editing the exact same things that are already working for them effectively. And it also indexes wiki. So Wikidata would then be able to structure other Wikimedia projects for us to find. Whereas, say, actually, no, let's zoom that back out and like go into Wikimedia Commons first before coming back to this point. So Wikimedia Commons now, think of this as the thing that holds everything. So all Wikimedia projects like to pull from Commons. So if you've gone to a Wikipedia page before, say, and I'm just going to directly go into a Wikipedia page just to illustrate really quickly. This is the main page of Wikipedia. Could anybody just quickly confirm that the screen share is following into the newly open page, or am I missing?
Yes, we can see the Wikipedia page.
Okay, thank you so much. Cool. Yeah, just wanted to make sure I'm not losing anybody. So this is Wikipedia's main page. This is the picture, obviously. There are ways that we can upload pictures, like uniquely to Wikipedia, not going through Wikimedia Commons, especially when copyright is involved, but they tend to be slightly difficult. All Wikimedia projects heavily prefer to use images directly uploaded to Wikimedia Commons. And that's because Wikimedia Commons tends to filter images that, they either need to be public domain or they need to be able to come into a Creative Commons license for some reason or another. And that would be why, say, Wikimedia Commons is then able to hold these images, and then knowing that that is going to be freely licensed, not controversially copyrighted images, Wikimedia projects can now draw upon those images very freely without worrying about running into lawsuits. So Wikimedia Commons plays that repository filtering function for image holding, video holding, you name it. And then as we come back here, that's where Wikidata comes in. Because if you've ever been to the Wikimedia Commons page, or if you've even tried searching for anything on Wikipedia, you will realize very quickly that the search function is really not great. It doesn't give you very effective searches. This is exactly why even Google invests ridiculously in improving its algorithms for searches so it can make it relevant to you when you try to find things. But Wikidata is then able to serve as that mother hub for indexing all of these wiki and other things for us to find. Another check-in, how are we doing? Cool, okay, seeing no comments. I'm assuming that this is making sense so far. So now going into Wikipedia. So Wikipedia summarizes accepted knowledge. Again, I can't harp on the low barrier thing enough. It's anybody can edit it, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. So you can work under a pseudonym if you so choose, but it's not like you have to get okayed by somebody to be contributing to effectively what they like to call the sum of human knowledge. There's a lot of Wikipedias. So obviously, because it's narrative knowledge, people that are comfortable with specific languages will be most comfortable using and reading content in those languages, which means that there is entirely different language Wikipedias and 299 of them at the last count that I visited. But these don't often talk to each other. So they all tend to be sort of like insular communities because they are literally, they speak different languages. And the scale of and here I'm talking specifically about the English Wikipedia, is that that's 6 million plus articles. So that's a fair bit. It's by far the most popular general information source. And again, kind of coming back to harp on the Web 2.0 point and how users are looking for information. I've added a couple of like studies up there on this slide so you can look at them in the time that you have later on if you'd like. But basically what a lot of people do is they just kind of go and Google things. And when you Google something, let's say that you wanted to understand what McCarthyism was. Here we go, we're Googling McCarthyism. This is what you get. Obviously, Google search has evolved very much in the past couple years, but increasingly they're taking over search keywords in order to give us these, what they call knowledge graphs, and these sort of like prominent featured links that give you the most immediately relevant information straight away. These are powered by Wikipedia and Wikidata. So this, again, kind of brings us back to this point about being the most popular general information source. It's not really that everybody's like only specifically going to Wikipedia. It's that if you specifically go to Wikipedia, then you're using Wikipedia. Cool. If you decide to Google it, then most likely you're also looking at at Wikipedia. So regardless of how you're going about things, unless you're explicitly seeking out, say, more sophisticated databases and doing advanced searches, generally speaking, people are going to be passing through, say, Wikipedia. Norms here, neutral point of view. If you've heard that about Wikipedia, you might have like sort of like winced a little bit because you know that can be a really difficult thing to say. The base idea here is that if there's a spread of sources, say from A to Z, then neutral point of view, literally all that means is if you see that only sources A to S are represented, you want to make sure that other sources also, become represented like within that constellation of the article. So if you're reading the article and based on what you know, you're like, wait, I just don't see sources T to Z represented here at all. And something that you can do to balance out that knowledge is contribute information based on those missing sources. And that would be a way of moving that article closer to a neutral point of view. So that's kind of the idea behind Wikipedia in general. And Wikipedia is powered by MediaWiki. So when you ever see references to MediaWiki saying that, oh yeah, MediaWiki something something, then just understand it as this is the software that runs Wikipedia. It's possible to fork MediaWiki and evolve it into other forms of wikis. I believe like things like Fandom Wiki, if you are familiar with like shows or things that get wikied over there, they are effectively a fork, an evolved version of MediaWiki. So people tend to adapt the software into like different kinds of wikis, and Wikipedia just happens to be the sort of true to Wikipedia version of that activity. And this is like the sort of the meat for today, right? Wikidata is database. So already the idea is like it's a bag of things and how they're related to each other. Again, kind of comes back to the whole queries thing. That's how it becomes useful. No cost barrier once again, and anybody can contribute. And the idea is really that it's exceptionally low barrier as a linked open data platform. I think I've said a couple of things here already. Let me know if I can elaborate a little bit more on that point. But that's really the main sort of reason that a lot of institutions have been coming into this with a lot of interest, because a lot of folks are interested in exploring linked open data. Wikidata happens to be the platform that is currently best positioned to do that in terms of the low barrier that it does have. I can also say it's interesting because Wikidata grew out of the experience of Wikipedia. So this platform actually got proposed more than 10 years after Wikipedia came about. And something that people realized very quickly through Wikipedia was, while obviously in narrative knowledge bases, where you need to understand the language you're reading in order to understand what it's saying, it prevents it from growing larger and unifying the content that is growing if the content is language dependent. So how would anybody ever make something language independent? And Wikidata was sort of the outcome of a lot of these thoughts as well. So what they did was they fairly explicitly took a cue from the limits of Wikipedia, and they wanted to make the languages talk to each other as well, in addition to all of these databases. And what I mean by that is, if you go to, let's bring it back to that Wikipedia link right here. So this person, let's go to their page. You might never click on this, but now you know sort of what they do. If you click on this thing that says Wikidata item, it'll take you to the relevant Wikidata item for that specific Wikipedia article. And once you land in this page, then you'll see, if you scroll to the bottom, it has all of these Wikipedia links in different languages. So really the idea behind the Wikidata items is you can put an item there, a thing there, you can define it, and you can define its relationships. And then it will be attached to this built-in narrative knowledge base that allows you to pivot into relevant languages if you're interested in looking at them. One explicit way that this gets operationalized within even, say, Wikipedia is, again, kind of coming back to this toolbar. If you see on the left side, it's this languages thing. This used to be a manual process for Wikipedia. So the way that people used to do this is they would go into a Wikipedia article and they would drop in literally the relevant language articles, and that would be an incredibly tedious process. It would require you to have a lot of upkeep. Wikidata eliminated this problem because that's literally what it does. It just syncs you right back here. If you pull from that data, then you can just operationalize that. And if you click on the Deutsch, it'll take you to the German article for Meinhard Moser. So that's sort of like a quick snapshot of some of the ways in which Wikidata has helped Wikipedia. It really it really makes it become a much more powerful platform because it frees up intellectual activity for things that machines can't do quite as well. And because it's automated, it allows you to present content that's like more up to date without us needing to labor over that updating process. And this becomes important again as we come back to, say, like the scale. So as the scale of Wikidata grows and as libraries and archives take more interest in it and start adding more resources into it, we are now taking advantage of a platform that not only has narrative bases attached to it in multiple languages, grows fast, but it's also, and this will come up very soon, it allows you to take advantage of queries. And queries are then fast, comprehensive, low barrier access to these information requests that are not only based on text matching, but again, they allow you to explore intersecting information very quickly, very efficiently, very effectively. Same deal as Wikipedia. The parallel here for software is Wikibase. So if you hear, for example, that OCLC piloted a Wikibase-based instance of linked open data, then this is what they use. They used the software that is Wikibase, which also powers Wikidata, but it doesn't necessarily, like, if you are using the software, you're making a clone of the software, and then you're developing it for your own purposes, then it allows you to set up an instance of linked open data based on the same sort of relationships concepts. But it's not immediately synced to Wikidata unless you sort of like build that bridge. So that's how Wikibase operates as in the software context. I've mentioned this a little bit already. This part is important to understand in regard to Wikidata because Wikidata, while it is, for the phenomenal thing that it is, Wikidata always tends to combine with other platforms, other ecosystems, again, to become more and more useful, especially when we're considering the ways that the average person does look for information, which doesn't tend to immediately be Wikidata. So this is a thing to think about. And the thing to think about here is like the gap. And it would be the gap between Wikipedia and Wikidata specifically in this instance. I would like in a nutshell, Wikidata, having come along more than 10 years after Wikipedia, has different levels of uptake in in terms of embracing what Wikidata can offer. And the differences here are by sort of language Wikipedia, because each language Wikipedia has a different culture. English Wikipedia, for example, by far is more resistant to adopting a lot of, say, like Wikidata's potential for automating information updates. And that tends to be because they had already had like a robust set of norms that didn't play with Wikidata even before Wikidata came in. Because by the time Wikidata was developed, Wikipedia already had like 4 million plus articles. Whereas, say, smaller language Wikipedias that ended up embracing Wikidata more had something closer to, say, 400,000. And that was the case of, say, the Catalan Wikipedia. Verifiability standards is sort of that's the grounds on which a lot of Wikipedia editors will tend to reject Wikidata advances into their territory, because funnily enough, a lot of them want to verify all the information for themselves. And they consider the automated information via Wikidata as infringing on Wikipedia's own rules for verifiability. This is obviously contested. Not everybody thinks this way, but this has definitely been a point of tension and continues to be. But ultimately, Wikipedia is a community that tends to prioritize local decision making. They don't like legislating like big general rules that has to apply to everybody regardless of local consensus. So there will still be this impulse to say, if, for example, you develop specific ways that Wikidata information gets pulled into Wikipedia, then they will let the community that stewards those changes like decide whatever they want for that. And so again, these community silos exist, and that's the gap to be aware of when we think about Wikidata and Wikipedia in the context of how people already look for information and how Wikidata becomes useful. So not just by itself, but also via other platforms. This is something that we need to sort of keep in mind. So what exactly is the ideal that I'm trying to get at here? The ideal in a nutshell is this graphic. So libraries and archives collect, steward, datafy, index, all of this beautiful information. And the supply and the demand, again, don't necessarily interact with each other in terms of how people look for information. So the ideal would be that Wikidata becomes like it becomes more integrated with Wikipedia itself, and the Wikipedia being sort of like the main front end interface for how people interact with information and find what they need. This becomes basically our collections get put where people are looking for it already. And where possible, I mentioned Wikipedia Commons earlier, there's always going to be copyright issues, and those are conversations to be had. If it's possible to upload directly to Wikimedia Commons, then this becomes a much easier point of conversation. If not, then there's the ways to put it into Wikidata and into Wikipedia. That's effectively how the ecosystem becomes like most useful. And this addresses all the sort of needs in the sense of like, where are people going to look for information? Oh, they're going to look for it on, say, Wikipedia, if they're just even like Googling things. Are there people that are querying information because they know how to use the semantic web? Then great, they're immediately going to Wikidata. But either way, we can pull on those points where people are already looking for things and drop our collections there. And that way they will get used in a way that's not necessarily going to be true if we don't take these steps. So that's the ideal in a nutshell, and kind of where I'm going with like, this is how these platforms become useful. Questions so far? Another check-in? Are we good? Awesome, okay. I'm gonna take that as a yes. So what does this mean for institutions? Again, in light of the ideal boils down to facilitating barrier-free access to information, barrier-free, again, usability, all of those sort of like ideal values that we like to embrace. I'm gonna break this down into maybe 3 buckets and see, like toy with them a little bit. I am very happy to like zoom into any of these like a little bit more, but we'll do that pending interest and leave a little bit of time for conversation later. So reference, infrastructure, informed use is gonna be the 3 buckets. So reference as a bucket. The idea here is improve free and open reference through, oh, I said UTL collections here. I mean, this is just like an example, but literally any collections, like collections or collaborative events. And this way of approaching Wikidata, Wikipedia, and those like interlinked platforms is, it'll be really interesting to special collections folks. And there are possibilities based on my experience for both digital and non-digital collections, because digital collections can, for example, be immediately used because they can be linked out directly, right? If they're non-digital, they can still have digital representation. So for example, if you have archival collections that haven't been digitized, they might still have access to memory finding aids. And then those permalinks, or ideally permalinks, can then be linked in and be made useful because somebody might have read about somebody, consider researching them in more depth, and then you're like, oh wait, so that is where the archives for this person lives. And this process might be supported through community events. So this might look like editathons, for example. Wikipedia and residence programs tend to do this a lot too, where, and this is kind of like my like sort of way of coming into this as well, where there will be like folks within an institution that for a couple hours each week or something decide to take the special collections material and use that to edit into Wikipedia. Infrastructure. A lot of more sort of technical workflows would fall in, especially under this bucket. The idea here is to contribute to linked open infrastructure, and this LO infrastructure would leverage the comprehensive network for research and relationship mapping. That's a lot of jargon there. The idea still comes back to making things usable, making them things sort of, you know, interoperable. You can go into one database and then go into another and repeat that process, and that would take a lot of time, but instead you could just go to a linked open database ecosystem and then find the information that you need without needing to go into so many different databases. It eliminates a lot of like unnecessary time and effort spent on a process that can really be a lot easier. This would be of particular interest probably to IT services, metadata, digital collections development, and this would be supported through, say, staff training, like co-working sessions. Regular working sessions, in my experience, seem very helpful. Workflow and documentation, obviously, there are now like much more developed networks for sharing workflows and sharing documentation. So these are always interesting. And again, happy to zoom into any of these during discussion. And last little bucket, informed use. So facilitating informed use of Wikipedia and Wikidata to allow effective learning, research, concept mapping. So the idea here is we already use it. How do we use it better? And this would be interesting to maybe like library liaisons, faculty, researchers, students, especially if you're in an academic library system. And this might be supported through, say, student and instructor training, and also queries. Maybe you'll have reference librarians that are able to use queries to help people find what they need. And that would be a way of, say, like library allowing the institution to have somebody that can navigate the semantic web on behalf of folks that can't, and allow them to still benefit from the same kinds of information. I wanted to add a little bit here because I mentioned queries earlier. I wanted to zoom in a little bit to just what that potential looks like. So Sparkle is a query language. By that, I really just mean, let's just go back to what I had earlier. Okay, here we go, yeah. So queries are, let me just show you right here. So I brought up the example earlier about, say, Academy Award, Nobel Prize. Like, is that something that people would, potentially search for? We don't know. But if you tried to do it on Google, it's kind of dependent on who's written about it, or say what pops up on the first page of Google. And instead, if the information exists in terms of these relationships that have been specified in the Wikidata universe, and you formulated a query to address specifically that, and this is what that would look like, say, you execute that query, and then it gives you immediately that there are two people that would apply to this category, like intersecting category, and those would be Bob Dylan and George Bernard Shaw. So if you look at this list, you can go in and you would find the Wikidata item for them. And from there, you can obviously, like zoom into your search. Maybe you'll now pivot out of Wikidata and take your search somewhere else. But again, the idea comes back to, you can really get very sophisticated with these queries. You can be like, oh, what's the number of handed out Academy Awards per award type? And that might look like this. You don't immediately need to know exactly how to query everything going in. There, you can visually set up a query using like the feature that they have here. If it gets a little bit finicky, then there's always like there's the talk section of the same page. I think it might have been the discussion section, or it might have been a different page. I can follow up later, but it's possible to request queries to the Wikidata community, and some folks that might have more experience with it will be able to help you there. So just to bring it back to that example really quickly. Where did that go? Aha, there we go. Let's finish this query. There we go. So this is how you would then get the award counts for all of these Academy Awards. Like if you try to look for this information, you would be looking for quite a while. If you go through Wikidata, they already know, in the sense that a lot of people have edited it. It's being updated all the time. If tomorrow somebody wants something new, then the chances are that it's probably going to be updated very soon. And immediately it gives you sort of what you need, just kind of visualizing this format. And then you're good to go, and like you're good to use it for research now. So Sparkle queries are one exciting aspect. Another exciting aspect out of is, because some ways of querying information or some tools that have been developed for making use of Wikidata powered information integrates maps, integrates, say, genealogy graphs, integrates, say, timelines. So let's bring up, for example, Historipedia. There's also this like multilingual map, heat maps. There's a lot of possibilities here. I'm not going to go through every single one. Maybe just bring up a couple that might be interesting, but I do want to sort of show you the variety of things. All of these are always open source tools. You can always improve them. You can build your own if you'd like. So really, there's a lot of possibilities here for not only data that might come up in lists, but you can formulate queries to give you a map. You can formulate queries, or you can use these tools to bring you geospatial data. Again, historical timelines, etc. So as you can see, this is another way of like visualizing the information, which you don't necessarily get as quickly unless somebody's already done the work via, say, search engines. So the links are there for you to sort of dig more into when you are ready. And I'm just going to check on time super quickly because I think we're at 40. Yeah, we're getting pretty close. This is a section that you can look at later, but I've already kind of gone into it. I've mentioned earlier that Wikipedia had developed its own norms for how to deal with sort of structures. I'll leave the slides, but basically, yeah, I've explained the interlanguage links, so you kind of get an idea of how Wikidata becomes helpful to people that are going through Wikipedia to find the information they need. These are just some ways in which Wikipedia already deals with the same kind of information that could technically go through Wikidata. So you can just look through the examples here. One thing that might be extra interesting to folks on this call might be authority control. Authority control actually also goes through Wikidata. So if on Wikipedia you're plotting around and then you see, oh wait, what is this little pencil icon? The pencil icon usually denotes that it's Wikidata powered. So it's layering a snippet, like a couple snippets of code that are pulling up Wikidata and then inserting it as you have specified into the Wikipedia interface. Finally, to wrap up, the presentation part of things, community building. There's a lot of exciting potential here, I think, that goes into all of sort of like, say, reference, into infrastructure, into informed use. The way that I will sort of put that into a nutshell is that it's kind of to update library and archive service to a more locally collaborative information search ecosystem. So obviously, for example, I am currently working at U of T libraries. If I were, and like, for example, me doing like my work might be one thing, but being able to work as part of a community of like more institutions around Toronto that specialize in different collections, that have different material, that have different expertise, because ultimately this is a decentralized process. Being able to share that insights and maybe even, I mean, save the context of a pandemic, which sort of keeps us in our homes, have say like regular working sessions, or like be able to develop specific locally relevant collections collaboratively. I feel like there are so many possibilities. It would probably take another 45-hour-long call to address all of those, I feel, but the idea, I think, always comes back to the similar hope of something that really takes advantage of the web. Like, we do develop our own infrastructure and like maintain our own indexing processes, but we could also do that and integrate ways that take advantage of literally the vast web that is out there and where people are already looking for information. And that's kind of where, yeah, I'll leave it here. If there's any questions, if there are any specific workflows that I can zoom into, very happy to do that. I'll also preface all of this by saying that, yeah, I'm always open to questions if you'd like to send me a message afterwards as well.
Thank you, Alex, for that great presentation on Wikidata. I think myself and everyone is quite amazed with Wikidata now. I wanted to ask if anybody had any further questions for Alex in the chat, because this is our Q&A hour, or 15 minutes of Q&A session now, so feel free to ask away. And Alex, could you provide a way of contacting you, whatever your preferred contact method is? Maybe stick it in the slides, and then we can share that after the recording as well, so people can get in touch with you.
That sounds good. I've dropped it into chat too. I will.
Excellent.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if this is like funny for anybody else, but I actually like really just prefer phone calls sometimes as well. If people,
okay.
Just like have a quick question, or they're like they have like a burning thing they need to sort out on screen. So I'll just drop that in here, as long as you don't like put it onto like Reddit.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Yes, so folks, please feel free to put your questions in the chat if you have any for Alex. I have a question, so maybe we'll start with that. I kind of want to know a little bit more about if anyone's taken all of that linked data and done something with AI. Have they, has that ever been something that you've heard of happening, or are there institutions that are trying to take that data and do something cool with it, like use algorithms to figure out how many times someone searches, I don't know, bird watching, or any example like that? I know it's a broad question.
Yeah, I also am very happy for anybody else that knows of more AI initiatives to like jump in and answer too. But I know that, I mean, Wikidata is a very frequent go-to source for just like linked open data, not only because like it's already big, but also because like it's linked to so many other data sets too. Yeah, I mean, like, because it's like the data is already released under CC0 license, people do tend to like use this data to effectively power like machine learning and AI initiatives for sure. So I know that it's like a fairly often done thing. I don't have any particularly good examples off the top of my head.
Okay. That's so great to hear that people are using it to do some really cool things.
Yeah,
yeah. I don't see any further questions in the chat. Do any of our organizers have any questions for Alex? Oh, we do have something from Caitlin.
For creating new Wikipedia pages. So the question is, this might be a little out of scope. Don't worry, it's not out of scope. It's sort of like all related, I think. But wondering if I have any advice for creating new Wikipedia pages and having them approved. Yes, in terms of making any edits on Wikipedia, actually, I'll just bring up Wikipedia. Wikipedia is always interesting. Wikipedia is always very messy, is also how I put it. It's interesting too, because like the cultural differences between Wikidata is like Wikidata doesn't obsessed quite as much on like whether something deserves to be on it because it's data points, and like, you know, more data points don't necessarily hurt. So Wikipedia culture though, and this is probably what Caitlin is getting at a little bit too, is they can get a little bit bitey in terms of who deserves to be on it or whatever. Generally speaking, a good rule of thumb for developing a new page, if it doesn't already exist, is one, check for if there are relevant pages that don't already have something, you know, developed as like part of the section. Like for example, let's say if there's the page for diabetes, you'll see a whole load of information here. There's, for example, this section on history. But then there's a main article on history of diabetes. But maybe before this main article, you might have just seen this. So sometimes like there are chunks of information that pre-exist on relevant pages. So really the best way to think about Wikipedia too is in terms of like the network of information that feeds the thing that you're trying to write. So investigate those. If it looks like there's a specific long chunk of information that can be like adapted into a new article, that's something that you can immediately build on. So that takes care of the content part of the question. If nothing like that exists, but you're trying to write something entirely new, and there isn't as much like network information supporting it, I would say it always helps to build like editing history. If you, for example, this is like the interface and what it looks like after you log in. If you go into, say, you know, like contributions, you will see like all of these changes that you've probably made in the past. So say this is like my log of changes, right? And it goes however long. And you'll start developing that pretty much as soon as you get onto Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a massive archive of every edit ever made. And the way that other editors will sort of like judge your credibility sometimes is based on like your history of like making good contributions that don't look like you're trying to push a certain point of view or something. So I would say it always helps if you have an account, you build a little bit of editing history, and then you like, you know, try to create new articles. It can also help to be editing in an editathon context, because that way you have facilitators that are immediately able to help you. And so, yeah, it's like if you want to create a new article, I would say just do it. If you're looking for information on like how to do that, then I can pass on a link for like how-tos. So that would be the general advice. Like, yeah, look for surrounding information, build a little bit of edit history, especially if it comes to more contentious parts of Wikipedia, broadly defined. And also, yeah, like if you have specific questions, then like I'm very happy for you to reach out to me as well, because like so much of this conversation also just depends on like what we're talking about. Oh, and like if you're creating your article, good rule of thumb is you have 3 to 4 sources, especially secondary sources, that can like speak to the notability of the person.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but now that we have your contact information, everyone feel free to reach out to Alex. I just wanted to thank all the attendees for coming to the webinar. Thank you again to Alex for presenting. The slides are posted in the chat, but we will make sure that we share it on our Google Groups. And I guess that's another plug for us to let everyone know too, that we have migrated from meetup.com to Google Groups. So if you haven't already joined the Google Groups, make sure you join now. I'll be sure to send out another reminder probably in the upcoming week. And when this video is posted, we will also let everyone know, but you have to be subscribed to the Google Groups. Oh, and Thomas just posted in the chat our new home for Code for Live Toronto. And I also want to thank the people that are our organizers. The person behind the Zoom today was Thomas. Thanks to Caitlin. May is not here, but she is also part of the organizing team. And overall, thank you everyone for attending. Oh, thank you, Alex. And I think that is us wrapping up for today. So we are going to end the meeting session now. So everyone have a great rest of your day and week. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.